Super Sparkly Sapphires. It's Treehouse Tuesday. Time for Agenda in my treehouse. Today is Tuesday, April 14th, 2020. We will begin with Mindful Minute as always, so please find your mindful position in 5, 4, 3, 2, wonderful. Today is the 134th day of school. How do we write 134? 100, 3 tens, and 4 ones. 134. 100, 110, 120, 130, 131, 132, 133, 134. On Treehouse Tuesday, we count by 5s, 6s, and 7s. Let's begin. When you count by 5s, you start with 5. Get ready to count with me. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, 85, 90, 95, 100. So when you count by 6s, where should you start? I hope you said 6. So if I'm here at 6 and I'm counting by 6s, how many more do I need to add? That's right, 6. So we're going to take 6 hops forward. Oh, look, it's 12. What's 6 more? 18. 24. Let's start back at the beginning. And I bet you're thinking of rocking that baby. 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, 36, 42, 48. Now, when you're counting by 7s, it's really tempting to jump because that's what we do with our counting wiggle. But today, we're just going to hold still and count by 7s, or at least I'm going to hold still. So, when you're counting by 7s, you start with 7, and then you add 7 more. 14, 21, 28. Let's go back to the beginning. 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, 42, 49. It's Tuesday, so we're going to practice counting. I hope you said nickels. Remember how we say it, nickel, nickel, nickel. And why do we do that? Because a nickel is worth 5 cents. So when you have a bunch of nickels, you count by 5s. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. 50 cents. Do you remember reading about Native Americans yesterday? Remember they were the very first Americans and the first people to live in America? That book mentioned that about 500 years ago, people from Europe started exploring and landing in America. And then 400 years ago, people really started to settle in America, and that really changed the lives of the Native Americans. So today we're going to read a story about some of the earliest people to come to America from England and stay. This story is called The Three Young Pilgrims by Cheryl Harness. Mary, Remember, and Bartholomew stood on the deck of a little boat in the very middle of dark blue ocean all around. They watched for mermaids and whales and pirates, but most of all, land. Here is a map of England, and this is the way that the ship sailed to get to America, to the East Coast. Down below their feet were the dark, bad-smelling rooms for the people and their bundles. That doesn't look like a very little ship to me. It looks pretty big. Below them was the hold, full of cargo and barrels of food and water. Below all this was dark, cold seawater, where Mama said fish swam through the bones of poor drowned sailors. It had been 60 days since the ship sailed from England. Finally, one cold November morning, there was shouting, "Land, land ho, 'tis America!" The pilgrims strained to see a pale ribbon of land. Every morning, the thin line on the horizon was thicker. Mary wondered if bears were watching from behind the trees. Captain Jones told the sailors to drop the Mayflower's iron anchor into the sea. The Mayflower was the name of their ship. I bet you've heard of the Mayflower. If you haven't, you have now. Papa said, "Tomorrow we will row ashore to see if all is safe. We'll find the best place for our colony, and our new baby will be born in the new world." Mama blushed happily. It was scary getting into the little boat to go ashore. Everyone's legs were wobbly after so many weeks at sea. But then, how wonderful to run on solid land. Can you imagine being on a ship for 2 months? Mama and the other women washed their families' clothes in the water and spread them out to dry on the rocks and bushes. The children went exploring. "Don't go too far," the mothers called. That afternoon, the pilgrims returned to the Mayflower. It would be their shelter until the place to settle was found. It was a very important decision. Finally, just before Christmas, Papa said to Mama, "We found a fine place to build. We will call it Plymouth Colony." Mama smiled. "I'm glad, Isaac," she said. The children saw that her face was thin and pale, and they felt worried. Everyone was hungry and tired of living crowded together on the damp, smelly ship. On the land and on the gray rolling sea, the days and nights were growing cold and bitter. Mary watched snowflakes melt into the salty sea. She could hear the ringing of axes and pounding of hammers. The sounds carried clearly across the water from the land where Papa and the others were building shelter as fast as they could. Some of the grown-ups were becoming sick. Mistress Mullins had died of the sickness. Mary shivered and wished that the new baby would come, that spring would come, and that they could all be warm and safe together in their own house. In the next weeks, those who were strong enough moved their belongings from the ship to the common house and to their own half-built houses. One dark winter evening, Papa built a smoky fire in their own hearth. That night, Bartholomew, Remember, and Mary warmed their fingers with their whispered prayers and bundled up with him and Mama. The family listened long to the sounds of the woods before falling asleep, and the wind blew cold off the sea. On the 16th day of March, Mary found tiny spring flowers in a clump of melting snow. Remember said, "It must be spring." Mama said winter is most dark and cold just before spring. In the darkest winter, half of the pilgrims had died of the great sickness. Mama and the new baby died too. A tear slipped down Bartholomew's nose. Then he saw the Indian. He stood quietly at the edge of the woods and looked at them with keen, dark eyes. His skin was the color of copper. The children turned and ran to find Papa. They found him trying to break up the rocky soil of their garden. "Papa, come with us." "Not now," he began in a weary voice. They pulled his hands. "Come on, there's an Indian." They saw the tall man walk up to Mr. Hopkins and Mr. Bradford. "Welcome, Englishmen," he said in a loud, deep voice. "My name is Samoset." "We've heard of Samoset." The thin, sad pilgrims came out of their fields and doorways to see the Indian. After spending the night with the Hopkins family, Samoset went back to his home in the forest. When he came back, he brought his friend Squanto. They brought food and later showed the settlers how to plant corn in a new way. In each hill of corn, they buried a small fish. Remember planted the herbs and flowers Mama had brought, and when no one was looking, Mary planted a fish too. I guess she thought that was a good idea. All down the warm green summer days, everyone tended their gardens and crops in the fields. The corn stood taller than Mary could reach. When Priscilla Mullins and John Alden were married, Remember brought primroses from Mama's garden. That fish must have helped, Mary smiled to herself. There was going to be a rich harvest. Well into the cool blue evenings, the pilgrims worked gathering the squash, peas, beans, barley, and corn. Herbs for medicines and seasonings were tied into sweet-smelling bunches. After the Sabbath prayers and hymn singing, Governor Bradford stood before the congregation. His collar was very white beneath his sunburned face. "We will invite our Indian brothers to feast with us and offer prayers of thanksgiving to the Maker for a bountiful harvest." For days, Plymouth was filled with good smells of cooking. Massasoit, the great leader, who we also know, Samoset, Squanto, and nearly 90 other men emerged from the shadowy woods wearing feathers in their black hair. Remember, these were the tribes of the eastern woodlands that we read about yesterday. The feasting went on for 3 days. As the deer brought by the Indians roasted and food was set out on long tables, the men challenged each other to see who was the strongest and the fastest. Late at night, Papa and his children sat at the edge of the circle of firelight. There was singing, and far off they could see the harvest moon rising over the ocean. Mary sat in Papa's lap, munching a bit on a berry tart. Bartholomew asked, "Papa, are you happy we came to America?" Remember frowned at her brother. She didn't want Papa to be sad. Mary looked up into Papa's dark eyes. After a time, he said, "Your mother and I wanted to bring up our children where no king could tell us how to live and pray." He sighed. "We didn't know it would be so hard, but yes, I am happy. And what about you children? We've had a devilish hard time and we've had to be brave, but are you happy?" Papa's voice was very soft. Bartholomew watched the fire and the men who had begun to dance and said, "I think I will be, Papa." Remember squeezed Papa's rough fingers and smiled up at him. As they walked home, Mary wished that Mama were there. Papa's arms tightened around her. Feeling warm and safe, she whispered to him, "I think I'll be happy too, Papa." So the Pilgrims and other people from England left their country because they wanted to have their own freedom and to be able to practice their religion how they wanted to and not be told by a king how to live. So tomorrow you will see what happens next in United States history. Today for Topic Tuesday, you will be writing about pilgrims. What do you think it would have been like to be a pilgrim and to leave England and come here to America on a ship? Would you have done that if you lived in that time? And what would it have been like to have that experience? So for Topic Tuesday, you are going to write about pilgrims.